Hello, everyone. This is the 129th episode of the Soccer Nostalgia Talk Podcast. As always, this is Sean from Los Angeles and the Soccer Nostalgia blog. Unfortunately, Mr. Paul Whittle from the 1888 letter blog could not make it this time. For this episode, I interview Peruvian journalist Mr. Daniel Arce as we discuss the Peru national team during the 1978 World Cup. Welcome back, Daniel.
Hello, Shahan. Sending a warm regards to all your viewers, to Paul back in England, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure, as always, to have a talk with you.
Thank you. So let's go back in time. Can you describe the state of the affairs in Peruvian football post 1970 World Cup into 1978?
Of course, as we discussed on the last time here in your space, Peru had an acceptable and okay participation in the 1970 World Cup. It was a decent appearance as I think most of the people who are interested in Peruvian football may agree. Unfortunately, it wasn't the same situation when it came to the World Cup 1974. Unfortunately, for Peru's interests, the Peru national team couldn't make it. There were big expectations for Peru for taking part in the 1974 World Cup. Unfortunately, the results weren't in favor for the Peruvian team, so it was a shame. It was quite a big shock because there was a very consolidated team with players from the squad performing in Europe and in very important leagues in South America. So apart from that, we may focus on a very important episode for Peruvian soccer in the 70s. We are talking about the Copa America 1975. It started in July. It lasted until October. For Peru, the first Copa America title for Peru was in 1939. There was a new coach, a Peruvian coach called Marcos Calderon, who was in charge of the team, and he was also in charge of the team in the 78 World Cup tournament. When it comes to the squad, it was a very complex squad, mixing players with lots of experience, with also very young players that were performing in the local Peruvian tournament. One of the biggest highlights from the team, as we discussed the last time in the 70 World Cup, was Teófilo Cubillas. At that time, he was playing in Porto, in Portugal. Another very important players were Hugo Sotil, forward, and the other forward, Juan Carlos Oblita, who was playing in Elche in Spain. And in the defense, they had Héctor Chumpitas, the captain of America, 31 years old, Julio Melendez, who was playing in Boca Juniors by that time, and Eleazar Soria in Independiente of Argentina. So, as I said, it was a mix, right? You had very experienced players, you had young players. This coach was Peruvian, Marcos Calderon, and well, he chose this squad to face the tournament. Peru was in the first place on his group. The group were only three countries. So on the knockout stage, for the first time in Peruvian history, Peru won a game against Brazil away in Belo Horizonte in Brazil. It was a 3-1 victory for Peru. And in the other game played in Peru, Brazil won 2-0. The way that CONMEBOL, the South American Association, decided whose country is going to be qualified for the final was tossing a coin. And the luck was on Peru's side. And that's how they qualified for the final. In the final, there were three matches: away, home, and a third match. On the first game played in Colombia, Colombia won 1-0. On the away match played in Peru, Peru won 2-0. And in the third game played in Venezuela, Peru won 1-0. And that's how they got their second Copa America title. It was a big shock for South American football. It's a pretty important highlight when it comes to Peruvian football in the 70s, previous to this qualification for the 78 World Cup.
Why do you feel Peru, despite having the likes of Cubillas and Chumpitas, failed to qualify for the 1974 World Cup?
As you said, they were very valuable players. Despite of having them, the results just weren't there. There were also very good players as Julio Melendez, as I said, Hugo Sotil, but the fixture and the performance of the team wasn't the one expected. So that's one of the reasons that Peru couldn't make it to the 1974. Reading newspapers and asking people who were enjoying football by that time, it was quite a shock because, as you said, Cubillas, Chumpitas, Melendez, Quiroga as a goalkeeper, it was one of the roughest defensive sides in South America. Unfortunately, the results weren't in favor for Peru, so they focused on the 1975 Copa America. They owned it. They went back home with the trophy, and the expectations couldn't be higher for the 1978 World Cup.
So Chumpitas, Cubillas, and Sotil were the sole remnants from the 1970 adventure, still present in this 1978 team. As far as their trajectories in these intervening 8 years, would you say they had improved to the players that were in 1970?
I think yes, they did. They improved for sure. Remember that in 1970 the coach was the Brazilian Didi. Cubillas was very young by then. We're talking 5, 6 years later when it comes to the qualifiers until the World Cup. So you had Héctor Chumpitas, now a very experienced player, Sotil, and well, Cubillas. They were working together as a team with their experience, with their hierarchy, if you want to call it. So yeah, I think that was a breaking point for Peru. As I said, in Copa America 75, the coach Marcos Calderon was looking forward to play with a mixture of experience and young players, and he did the same for the 1978 World Cup.
So let's discuss the trajectory of the Peruvian manager, Marcos Calderon Medrano, and how did he differ tactically from Didi from 1970?
Well, Didi was very offensive, choosing his 11 starters. He used to play with 4-2-4 tactic. Marcos Calderon was more conservative. He liked playing with a very, very, very marked 4-3-3 formation. He had, well, the resources to actually engage into a 4-3-3 formations, but through the game it would change into a 4-2-4. If we check one of his additional lineups, and let's say his favorite lineup was with Quiroga as a goalkeeper, Jaime Duarte, Rodolfo Manso, Héctor Chumpitas, and Rubén Díaz. Chumpitas played in the 1970s World Cup, the couple of back defenders. José Velázquez, César Cueto, and Juan Muñante, three midfielders. José Velázquez as a five, as you may call, stuck in the center. Muñante and Cueto as interiors, trying to create game, and three forwards. Guillermo La Rosa on one side, Teófilo Cubillas on the other side, and they were exchanging positions and depending on the mechanism of the game, and Juan Carlos Oblitas as a number nine, as a forward, if you may call it. So yeah, the main difference was the tactic, definitely. 4-2-4 for Didier, the 1970s World Cup, 4-3-3 that could make a 4-2-4 or 4-5-1, depending on the rival, depending on the development of the game.
As a player, he had played for Sport Boys in the 1950s. As a manager, he had managed the likes of Universitario, Sporting Cristal, Alianza Lima, and in fact, he had managed Peru in a previous spell from 1965 to 67. We have to also mention that tragically, Marcos Calderon was killed in the 1987 Alianza Lima plane crash.
He did. He passed away with other Alianza Lima staff members and young players, such as Caico González Ganosa, who was the goalkeeper for Peru in the 1975 Copa America, was very young by the time of his disease. He was also in this plane crash in 1987. So yeah, it was a tragic loss, a very dark episode for Peruvian football.
Following the 1978 World Cup qualifications, there were some questions whether Marcos Calderon would even remain as the manager, as his contract was not renewed immediately following the qualifiers in July 1977. It was reported that the Peruvian Federation had even asked the other 16 first division managers to provide a list of 33 players and a choice for the national team manager. Why wasn't Marcos Calderon a certainty after qualifying the nation?
That's right, Shahan. That's right. It wasn't very safe at first, his continuity as the Peruvian national team coach. He had some issues with the workers at the Peruvian Association, so they suggested the other coaches from the local teams to nominate some kind of trainers for them to be the Peruvian team. But at the end, they renewed the confidence for Marcos Calderon, and he was the chosen one to assume to be part of the 1978 World Cup. As you said, it was his second spell in Peru. He previously took part of the in the 60s. So yeah, he was very experienced. He knew the game because he was also a professional footballer in his younger years. So yeah, that's how the qualifier started for Peru. Marcos Calderon with a renewed confidence for managing the team. Let's remember that it was a very tough qualifier because there were only three direct slots in the game for the World Cup. Only the first three teams with the best points, with the best score would qualify, and the fourth one would play an international knockout against other country.
For the 1978 World Cup qualifiers, Peru are in the first group, are there with Ecuador and Chile, and they're hardly troubled in this phase. Then there's a final phase of qualifying along with Brazil and Bolivia. And there also, the only difficult match was against Brazil that they lost. Otherwise, they were much stronger than Bolivia and they defeated them 5-0. And we should mention that the playoff that you mentioned, it was Bolivia and they lost to Hungary for that playoff, for that final spot. As far as the qualifiers, do you think, I know you just mentioned it was somewhat difficult because there only one team from each group that advanced. Do you still nevertheless think they were somewhat untroubled for these qualifiers?
They were in some point. As you said, the first stage was very easy for Peru. They were in a group three along with Chile and Ecuador in Lima against Ecuador 4-0. Velázquez scored the first goal, Juan Carlos Oblita twice, and Alejandro Luces. 2 weeks later, against Chile, the result was made on the second half. Hugo Sotil at the 49th minute and Juan Carlos Oblitas at the 55th. On the rest of the matches was a draw 1-1 against Ecuador at Ecuador. Juan Carlos Oblitas scored, and also with Chile 1-1. Juan José Muñante scored the draw. So with these results, Peru qualified in the first place with 6 points, and then in the final round, as you mentioned, they were paired with Brazil and Bolivia. Brazil won the match against Peru 1-0, July 10th, 1977, and Peru against Bolivia. It was a very decisive match. The one winning would qualify directly to the World Cup, and in this case, Peru won 5-0 against Bolivia. And Bolivia, as you said, lost the international knockout against Hungary. So that's how Peru got its spot at the 1978 World Cup.
Now, let's get to the preparations. There were reports that even Marcos Calderon had stated that the preparations would be disorganized, and the one advantage Peru would have was that they would be playing on the home continent. Why do you think there was not proper planning?
I think it was because of the bad relationship between Marcos Calderon and the FPF, the Peruvian Football Federation. Before the World Cup, there were only four friendlies between the months of April and May against Brazil, who was a respectable team, Mexico, China, and Bulgaria. Peru only won two games, one draw, one loss. So,
Yeah, also the two losses against Argentina at the Castilla Cup matches in March. Yeah. So not a
exactly.
very good preparation.
Not a good preparation. The morale of the team was low. The relationship between the coach and the football association wasn't the best. So it was a sum of factors. If you want to go back to the 70s and the preparation for the 70s, there were lots of games, but it wasn't the same logistics, the same way as they did before. And I think that at the end, this might have been one of the reasons that why Peru had such a poor development, has such a poor appearance in the 1978 World Cup.
So in my research, I came up with these stories. In February 1978, Marcos Calderon took his 33 players to train at Chiclacayo, which is a mountain retreat. And it was chosen because it's the same altitude as Mendoza, which was a group in Argentina. There were some inexperienced players that had not participated in the qualification. We have to mention that there were veterans like Julio Melendez and the goalkeeper Ganoza. They failed physical tests in this training camp. The preparations were arranged by government committee. Medrano had wanted 10 friendlies against the likes of Yugoslavia, France, England, Spain, and West Germany, and none of these were arranged. He wanted also friendlies against Iran, Holland, and Scotland. But I doubt if the respective federations would have agreed to facing friendlies ahead of the World Cup. That would be my guess. If he did not get Iran, he had wanted to play against Tunisia because of apparently a similar style to Iran, and either Czechoslovakia and West Germany. In any case, none of these requests ever happened. There were also some controversy whether the players' wives would be allowed to go to Argentina. And there was divided opinion amongst the players regarding this. There were some issues whether disorganization or lack of finances did not allow Marcos Calderon to have his wish for this preparation phase. It was reported that Marcos Calderon had traveled from Lima to Verona in Italy, thinking he was going to watch a match between Italy and Scotland. But it turned out to be the Italy B team against the Scottish 11 selection. Was this a symptom of the disorganization at the Federation?
For sure, no doubt. Episodes like that simply describe how poor, how unprofessional, how, the lack of interest from the association towards the national team, and also disrespect towards the coach and his companions. It was very criticized by the time because Calderon was looking forward to see the Scottish stars, just like Kenny Dalglish, Asa Hart for Tom Forsyth, Kenny Burns, Archie Gamil, but nothing like that happened. And it was the Italian B-side, as you said. Returning to the warm-up friendlies against other countries, Peru actually wanted to play against Iran, as crazy as it sounds, because they were facing them on the 1978 World Cup. And they also tried to find a country with a similar functioning, such as Tunisia. As you said, Algeria was also on the table, but at the end, they were a very poor choice of rivals. Brazil and Argentina were powerhouses back then. They were good matches, but China, Mexico, Bulgaria, in my humble opinion, they weren't the right rivals in this case when it comes to preparing for a World Cup.
There were also reports that Juan Muñante might not participate as his Mexican club UNAM, Pumas, they demanded insurance. What was the story about that?
By that time, Juan José Muñante, forward of Peru, was playing with UNAM Pumas in Mexico. It was more of a concerning regarding the contract, and the Mexican club wasn't very convinced of letting Muñante go because they were worried that he may have an injury because all through that year and the year before, he had a series of injuries that it wasn't possible for him to perform at the highest level of competition. So that's why Pumas UNAM was worried about it. But at the end, he made it.
Given all those troubles that we discussed, how were Peru's chances viewed by the local press and the public?
The expectations were very high. Remember that 3 years before they won the Copa America with a very similar team chosen for the World Cup. But there was one big difference, though. Julio Melendez was 31 years old in the 1975 Copa America. For the World Cup, he would be 34, and he was injured. So Marcos Calderon couldn't pick him. That's why the team would perform with four defenders, three midfielders, and three forwards. Manso, Rodolfo Manso, and Héctor Chumpitas were the chosen for the right back and left back. Rubén Díaz was playing as a left back, Jaime Duarte as the right back, José Velázquez as the main midfielder in the middle. Cubilla's presence in the field was different from the 1970s because Cubillas used to play either in one of the sides, attacking sides, either left or either right. But in Marcos Calderon team in the 78, he was used as an interior for the left, as a left midfielder. Cesar Cueto on the right midfield. Muñante, La Rosa, and Oblitas were the three chosen ones for the attacking for forward. So it was a very tough team. I think that the main strength of the team was the midfield and the forward. Without having Julio Melendez, there was a little bit of doubt about Peru's defense, but the midfield and the attack was very promising. So the expectations were very high. Again, just a couple years after owning the Copa America, Peru, for the press, for public opinion, for all the football community throughout South America, was one of the candidates of South America to maybe not be a favorite to win the title, but to advance the foremost in the tournament.
Let's look at the 22 players selected by Marcos Calderon for this 1978 World Cup. At number one, we have backup goalkeeper Ortorino Sartor of Iquitos. At number two, defense, we have Jaime Duarte of Alianza Lima. Number three, defense, we have Rodolfo Manzo of Deportivo Municipal. Number four, defense, Hector Chumpitas of Sporting Cristal. Number five in defense, Ruben Toribio Diaz of Sporting Cristal. Now the midfielders. You have at number six, you have Jose Velasquez of Alianza Lima, Juan Muñante of UNAM in Mexico, number seven. Number eight, Cesar Cueto of Alianza Lima. Number nine, Percy Rojas of Sporting Cristal. Number 10, Teofio Cubillas, Alianza Lima. So now we come to the strikers. Number 11, Juan Oblitas of Sporting Cristal. And number 12, Roberto Mosquera of Sporting Cristal. Number 13, backup goalkeeper Juan Cáceres of Alianza Lima. Number 14 in defense, Jose Navarro of Sporting Cristal. Number 15 at midfield, Herman Leguia of Deportivo Municipal. Number 16 in midfield, Raúl Gurriti of Sporting Cristal. Number 17 in midfield, Alfredo Quesada of Sporting Cristal. Number 18 in midfield, Ernesto Labarce of Sport Boys. Number 19, a striker, we have Guillermo La Rosa of Alianza Lima. Number 20, another forward, Hugo Sotil of Alianza Lima. Number 21, starting goalkeeper, Ramon Quiroga. More about him later from Sporting Cristal. And number 22 in defense, Roberto Rojas of Alianza Lima. Many familiar faces that you mentioned already in your discussions. We come to the World Cup. We mentioned already in the first group, their opponents are going to be Iran, Scotland, and the 1974 World Cup finalists, the Netherlands. They start the World Cup against Scotland on June 3rd at Cordoba. For this match, Peru starts with Quiroga, Duarte, Manzo, Chumpitas, Diaz, Velasquez, Muñante, Cueto. He'd be replaced by Percy Rojas in the 82nd minute, Cubias, Oblitas, La Rosa, and he'd be replaced by Sotil in the 62nd minute. Everyone knows about this match. Scotland were expecting to win, and they take the lead in the 14th minute.
Joe
When,
Jordan.
when Bruce Rioch's shot was parried by Quiroga, but Joe Jordan knocked in the rebound.
Mm-hmm.
Peru ties the match in the 43rd minute. When at the edge of the box, Cubias passes to Cueto, who shoots past Alan Ruff. In the second half, in the 63rd minute, Scotland are awarded a penalty kick. Ramon Quiroga comes to the rescue and he saves Don Masson's penalty kick. So we come to the last 20 minutes and two spectacular goals. In the 72nd minute, Cubias scored with a long range shot from outside of the box. 5 minutes later, he takes a free kick on the left side with the outside of his foot that completely tricks Alan Ruff, who was expecting a shot on the other angle, other side. It's one of the most replayed goals that you see for World Cup matches. Peru came away with an impressive 3-1 win that not many people expected. Because believe it or not, Scotland were the lone British team at this World Cup, and some were expecting that they might do actually well in this World Cup.
For sure. As you mentioned, Shahan, it was very emotional, a very emotional game for Peru. Starting the game, losing just 15 minutes of the first half by a great goal of Joe Jordan. But let's talk about a little bit before the game started. Marcos Calderón was aware that he was facing one of Europe's finest teams. Let's not say the best team, but with a lot of technique, with a lot of associated play. We're talking about a team led by Asa Hartford, with Kenny Dalglish, Joe Jordan, Willie Johnson as the three offensive pieces, with Lou Macari and Archie Gemmell on the waiting as subs to enter the game and change the mindset of the game. So Marcos Calderon was aware that he was facing Ali MacLeod team with a great qualification side in Europe. So he decided to play with his classic 4-3-3. Percy Rojas, the midfielder, was even before the game was the one chosen to be the starter. But at the last minute, Calderon decided to put Cesar Cueto instead of Percy Rojas in the midfield. So Cesar Cueto at the end scored the first goal in the 43 minutes, as you said. And in the second side, two beautiful goals from Teófilo Cubillas, I think one better than the other. I think there's no doubt, and you can agree with me that Teófilo Cubillas' second goal, such a strange technique, completely confusing Alan Ruff, is one of the best definitions when it comes to a free kick in World Cup. So yeah, Peru started the group winning the first game and waiting for the Netherlands match.
Yeah, so Netherlands in their first match they had defeated Iran 3-0. So on June 7th at Mendoza, the sides face off. Now this Dutch team, they did not have Johan Cruyff who refused to travel to this World Cup, but they nevertheless included the likes of Robbie Rensenbrink, Ruud Krol, Wim Janssen, Arihan, Johnny Rep, the Van der Kerkhoff twins. So a very good team managed
Johan
by
Neeskens.
Niskans, indeed, yeah. A side managed by the Austrian Ernest Happel. So for this match, Peru started with Quiroga, Duarte, Manzo, Chumpitas, Diaz, Velasquez, Muniante, Cueto, Cubias, Oblitas, La Rosa, and he'd be replaced by Sotil in the 62nd minute.
The same 11 as
Yes,
Calderon chose for the debut against Scotland.
yes. This match ended as a diplomatic scoreless tie that favored both sides going into their last match. Once it looked like it was going to be a tough battle, I don't think neither side probably exerted themselves knowing that this would satisfy both of them.
I agree. I agree. I think it was a good business for both parties. It was a very closed game. I think that if one of the team might have win the game, it would be 1-0 because it was very, very, let's not say similar mindsets of game because the Netherlands were playing with a classic 4-4-2 against the 4-3-3 proposed by Calderon, the same 11 starters than Scotland. But really impressed from that time. What the Peruvian journalism says is that it was a very rough game for both teams. It was more of friction. It was more disputed in the mid side of the field. And of course, Netherlands was missing his star, Johan Cruyff, for political issues. He decided not to travel to Argentina. Just to give a little bit of context, Argentina was living a dictatorship by that time, and General Videla was the president of Argentina at that time. And as you mentioned at the beginning of our talk, even some players from Peru weren't very keen on traveling to Argentina because they didn't feel safe, and some others were trying to show their solidarity for the Argentinian people.
Their final match in the group was seemingly the easiest one against first time qualifiers Iran. This match was on June 11th at Cordoba. For this match, Peru started with Quiroga, Duarte, Manzo. He'd be replaced by Leguia in the 67th minute. Chumpitas, Diaz, Velasquez, Muniante, Cueto, Cubias, Oblitas, and La Rosa, and he'd be replaced by Sotil in the 60th minute. Peru would take the lead in the second minute when Muniante's corner kick from the right side was headed in by Velasquez. In the 36th minute, Peru are awarded a penalty kick, which I think it was somewhat of a harsh decision when Nasrallah Abdullahi, with a shoulder charge, they were battling for a ball with Oblitas, and he just hit him with a shoulder, but it clearly did not look like it warranted a penalty kick. But
I agree.
nevertheless, it was, and Kubia scored from it. 3 minutes later, this time it was a clear penalty when the Iranian goalkeeper Nasser Hejazi he fouled Kubias in the box, and again Kubias scored from a penalty kick. Now, 2 minutes later, Iran pulled the goal back through Hassan Roshan. In the second half, they attempted to get back into the game, but just 11 minutes from the end, from the middle, Kubias was sent through. And as he advanced, the ball ricocheted off a defender, and he used that to advance and score the fourth goal. Obviously, Peru were much stronger than Iran, although given Iran's chances, maybe the score is a bit harsh on Iran, I would think. But Peru clearly were a better team. They won. They won this group and they advanced to the second round. I imagine just like 1970, advancing from the group stage was seen as a victory in itself.
For sure. At that time, let's say it was expected because the Peruvian press, after the first game, I think that the football community, they were convinced that Peru and the Netherlands were going to be the two teams advancing to the next round because Scotland performances weren't the ones anticipated, and Peru was playing very well. It was very good on the defensive side, also on the attack, make scoring goals with Cubillas playing in the highest level despite of his age. The midfield very coordinated between each other. Cesar Cueto playing very well, Jose Velasquez as well. Hugo Sotil, who was the first option from the subs when he entered into the game, he was changing Peru's mindset with speed, with associating with his teammates. So yeah, as you mentioned, the 4-1 against Iran was they give Peruvian people reasons to believe that they could have a good performance on the second round, but unfortunately for Peruvian interest, it wasn't. It wasn't that way.
So in the second round, the format is similar to the 1974 World Cup. You have the top two teams from each group advancing to final group phase. And again, it's four teams in a group. Peru were in the same group as Brazil, Poland, and the hosts Argentina. It already looked difficult for the Peruvians playing against the hosts and one of the favorites in Brazil. They start the second round at Mendoza on June 14th against Brazil. For this match for Peru, we have Quiroga, Duarte, Manzo, Chumpitas, Diaz. He'll be replaced by Jorge Navarro in the 11th minute. I believe he was injured.
Mhm.
Velasquez, Muniante, Cueto, Cubias, Oblitas, and he'll be replaced by Percy Rojas in the 46th minute, and La Rosa. Brazil would win this match 3-0. In the 15th minute, Dircio scored from a free kick, and he followed it up in the 28th minute with a long range shot from the left side. In the 73rd minute, Roberto Dinamite was fouled in a box, and Zico scored from a penalty kick. So the first setback in this World Cup for Peru.
It was a very rough comeback for Peru because expectations were very high. In the other hand, Brazil was Claudio Coutinho's Brazil was fantastic team. Roberto Dinamite, as you said, Dirceu, Chico, Toninho Cerezo, Amaral, Oscar in the defense. It was a tremendous team with such an ambitious mindset and great technique on the 11 players in the field. But Peru had the weapons to actually make a good game against Brazil. I think the very early goals in the first half, 15 minutes and 28, both goals from Dirceu were, I think, were the end for Peru. Lack of ideas, lack of collective function. So it wasn't a very good game for Peru. But despite of the 3-0 loss, Calderon still maintained his 11 starter team. He couldn't change the team. And the other game against Poland, he actually changed the midfield and also the defense. As you said, Ruben Diaz was injured in the first half against Brazil.
So the second match is against Poland at Mendoza on June 18th. Now, this is a Poland that includes young Zbigniew Boniek and also other stars like Kazimierz Dana, Lato, Jarma. This is a team that had finished third in the 1974 World Cup and would finish third in the 1982 World Cup and would also face Peru again in the 1982 World Cup. For this match, Peru starts with Quiroga, Duarte, Manzo, Chumpitas. Jorge Navarro started. As you mentioned, Diaz was injured. Munyante, he'd be replaced by Percy Rojas in the 46th minute. Cueto, Cubillas, Oblitas, Quesada, and La Rosa, and he'd be replaced by Sotil in the 74th minute. This match was decided in the 65th minute. Lato crossed from the right side, and Jarmak headed in the winner. And Peru lost and were eliminated from the World Cup with one match to go.
It was Peru's last chance to get in line and try to appeal for keep on going on the World Cup. Unfortunately, as you said, Sarmak goal was the end of the Peruvian dream, if you may call it that way. That was the end of Peru, and the last match against Argentina was just a diplomatic presence, if you may call it.
Let's get to this much talked about match on June 21st, 1978, that I'm sure we'll still be discussing in 50 years' time. This match was at Rosario. Let's give background to this. Going into this match, Brazil and Argentina are equal on points, and each team has a chance to advance as group winners to the final match. And let's mention that these matches are not being played simultaneously as they would be in these days. Now, Brazil has already defeated Poland 3-1 going into this match. So, Argentina, who were playing like a couple of hours later, they know that they must at least score 4 goals to advance to the final. For this match on June 21st at Rosario, Peru started with Quiroga, Duarte, Manzo, Chumpitas, Velasquez. He'd replaced by Goriti in the 51st minute, Munyante, Cueto, Cubillas, Oblitas, Quesada, and Roberto Rojas. We all know the final score of this match. Argentina wins 6-0. Mario Kempes and Leopoldo Luque score twice, and Tarantini and Hausmann score the other goals. There have been all these conspiracy theories for decades now regarding the circumstances of this match versus Argentina. There are some who think it was a political backdoor deal and things as such. This on top of the fact that many people think the whole idea that Argentina knew the score they had to achieve was unfair in itself, regardless of all the conspiracies. What is a consensus from the Peruvian side about this match?
I can say there's a majority. I can say there's a consensus. As you said, there are lots of conspiracy theories, nothing documented, nothing 100% accurate. You have versions from players who were participating in the 78, such as Jose Velasquez, decades after. He mentioned in some interviews around, I think it was before the 2018 World Cup, he mentioned in an interview that 6 players of the national team allegedly were influenced by Argentinian interests. In a few words, they were paid by the Argentinian team to have a poor performance against their team. But we don't have the certainty, we don't have the confidence, and nothing proved until now. What is actually truth, and it was verified by players back then, was that days before the game against Argentina, some players asked for a meeting with the coach Marcos Calderon, and these players suggested him that it wouldn't be ethic to include Ramon Quiroga because he was born in Argentina. They suggested that Cáceres or Sartor, one of the other two substitute goalkeepers, should start the game. And allegedly, Marcos Calderon was okay with the idea. He transmitted the players that they were right and Quiroga wouldn't play against Argentina. But when we look at the starters, Quiroga actually started the game against Argentina. I think that this only strengthens and this only make the Peruvian football community to be more confused against for what happened on that game against Argentina. Some other rumors said that General Videla, the Argentinian president at that time, went into the locker room and tried to intimidate the Peruvian players, but there's nothing proved about those theories, let's say, because we don't have the accuracy or the rigorosity to know what actually happened. But the result was 6-0 against Peru. Argentina only needed 4 goals. They scored 6 times, and it was the end of the journey for Peru in the 1978.
I'm curious regarding Quiroga. How does the Peruvian public view him today after all these decades?
When he retired, he became a trainer. He coached Universitario, one of the most important teams here, I think twice or 3 times. But he's still in the soccer atmosphere because he works for a commentator, like an
Right.
anchor. So he's still in the soccer atmosphere. But the Peruvian people doesn't mention this Argentina game to him at all.
Why do you think there were such disparities in performance from the first to the second round?
I think that the lack of warm-up games were definitely one of the reasons that why the team couldn't hold this, let's say, energy throughout the first round to the second round. Let's be fair, we can't compare Iran as much respect that we can have for the team. We can't compare their technique and their function as Poland or Argentina or Brazil. Peru played a great game against Scotland. Peru didn't play the best game against the Netherlands. So I think that in some way it even turned into an emotional issue for the Peruvian team. I don't know, in my opinion, being caged in a group against Poland, against Brazil, against Argentina, I think it was maybe the lack of confidence for the players to face such an important issue.
Besides Cubias with his goals, which Peruvian players do you think performed well and which ones were disappointing?
There were very big expectations for Cubillas, of course, for what he did in the 1970s. Also for José Velázquez, Rubén Díaz, and Héctor Chupitas, who were the most experienced players, and of course for the goalkeeper Ramon Quiroga. But I think that one of the lowest points was in defense. Rodolfo Manso, who was the one chosen by Calderon to join Chumpitas in the defense, wasn't at a very good point in his career. In my opinion, I would have preferred maybe Jose Navarro or Roberto Rojas instead of Manso because Chumpitas wasn't the tallest of the defenders, but he had a lot of stamina and a lot of strength. And Manso wasn't very tall either. So you had two back defenders who weren't very tall, and you were facing the Netherlands and you were facing Poland. So I think the defense was the most criticized side on the Peruvian team. And I think that the best version of Peru was definitely the first game against Scotland. The midfield worked perfectly. Velasquez was recovering balls. Cueto and Cubillas were making the three in the front work very well. La Rosa, with his strength and his height, was very good at facing the defenders from the rivals. So I think the game against Iran, the game against Scotland were the best versions of Peru how the World Cup, and of course Brazil defeat and the Argentina defeat were the two lower points in the tournament for Peru.
Having participated in the two of the last three World Cups, was there a belief that Peru would be regular qualifiers from then on?
You have two options there. Either Peru recover from being hurt badly by Argentina, by Poland, by Brazil in the 78 World Cup, and also noting that players as Cubillas, Chumpitas, Julio Melendez, who wasn't available for the 78 World Cup, Quiroga, La Rosa, were in their 30s. So the expectations weren't that high because there wasn't a new generation of players in important leagues for people of Peru to actually believe that they could have a good performance in the qualifiers for the 82. But I think that's another story, right? I think that football has its own ways of surprising us. And at the end, with a team that, in my humble opinion, wasn't very highlighted, wasn't very smart functioning together, they qualified for the 82, but I think that's another discussion.
In closing, in our last podcast about the 1970 World Cup, we ask whether there's a debate regarding which side, whether the 1970 side or the 1978 side was considered the best for Peru in its World Cup history. So, what are the merits of this 1978 side?
Well, let's start with the coaches. Didi, the Brazilian one in the 70s, with a very offensive side against Marcos Calderon, more conservative, more of wanting to have the ball or wanting more of defending well and depending on Cubillas or Oblitas or Cesar Cueto. I think that's open to debate, because if you ask in the streets, if you ask in the fields, some people prefer the 70s, some others do prefer the 78. I think each team has its own pros and cons, their own different ways of reading the game, structure, functionality. I think Cubilla's prime was in the 70s, but at the 78, he played well despite of his age. And you had players that couldn't actually make it to the World Cup. I mean, they were in the squad, but they didn't play, like Raúl Gorriti or the goalkeepers Sartor and Cáceres. So at the end, it was decision of Marcos Calderon. I think he chose a great team, but the results weren't with him, just like the 70s. Having a good performance in the first stage and not having the best of lucks in the second one, just like in the 78. So I think that depends on the opinion of each other. In my humble opinion, I prefer the 78 team. I had higher expectations. When I look at newspapers, when I check the videos and I watch the game against Brazil and Poland, it's hard to believe when you watch the games because they were really, really similar level. The match against Brazil, the goals were very early. That completely make impossible for Peru to get back on track. And the match against Poland as well. And well, we can't discuss Argentina because there was only one team in the field. So, but yeah, I think both teams were great, different coaches, different mindsets, different strategies, but good teams. In regular terms, I would say that both were good teams.
With that, I would like to thank you for your participation in this interview. As always, feel free to leave questions and comments, and all our respective contact information is on the blog and podcast listings. So, Daniel, thank you very much and hope to continue these discussions on Peru football history.
As always, Shahan, a big pleasure. Thanks to you for the opportunity. Thanks to your viewers, and I hope to see you on Paul next time.
Thank you.